Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. The influx of Western weapons has slowed down but not stopped the Russian war machine. And this week, the Ukrainian forces announced that they've strategically pulled back from parts of the crucial eastern town of Chasiv Yar. The Pentagon has again pledged another $2.3 billion worth of weapons, even as Kiev awaits the delivery of the much-touted F-16 fighter jets this month. But the nub of the problem is elsewhere. The Western nations are able to flood Ukraine with their weapons. But Ukraine's problems aren't just limited to military hardware. The bigger puzzle that Kiev is finding it really hard to solve is about getting adequate and trained manpower to be fielded onto the battlefield. And this perhaps explains why the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made a dramatic U-turn for the first time since the war began more than 2 years ago. Volodymyr Zelensky now wants Russian representatives to be present in the next peace summit. So what does this mean for the Russia-Ukraine war that has now dragged on for so long? Our next report gets you more details. These videos, captured by the Russian combat drones, will give you a glimpse of the Russian strategy at the moment. In coordinated precision strikes, the Kremlin is taking out the Ukrainian air power by destroying one Ukrainian fighter jet after another, even as the fighter jets were in their hangar. The intelligence for these strikes was gathered by the Russian drones, and once the targets were identified, Russia is believed to have used its Iskander missiles with devastating efficiency. Not only do these strikes expose the gaping holes in Ukraine's air defense systems, but they also indicate the fate that awaits the much-touted F-16 fighter jets that are slated to arrive this month. Where the F-16 fighter jets will be stationed in Ukraine is not clear. But the Starokostiantyniv Air Base, which is widely suspected to have gotten the facilities ready to house the F-16 fighter jets, has been repeatedly struck by the Russians using hypersonic Kinzhal missiles and drone clusters in the last fortnight. The Ukrainians are clearly losing the ground and air contest. But in the naval war that is unfolding in the Black Sea, Kiev has managed to destroy almost 25% of Russia's Black Sea fleet. And this has forced Kremlin to withdraw a number of its combat-ready warships from Sevastopol and anchor them at Novorossiysk.
I think they should not return there to Sevastopol. This is obvious. I don't know what they're thinking. They simply left Sevastopol to retrieve their ships from under Ukrainian fire. That's the main reason as to why they find themselves now in Novorossiysk. The Ukrainian Defense Forces has firepower control over Sevastopol.
The Ukrainian field hospitals are overwhelmed with the number of injured. Wounded soldiers are wheeled in 24/7 from the front lines. There is no clear tally on the number of soldiers who've been killed and wounded in this war. But according to a document presented in the American Congress, the US officials estimate that as many as 120,000 Russian soldiers may have been killed, while the Ukrainian death toll is estimated to be over 100,000. And more than 300,000 soldiers of both sides combined are said to have sustained some serious injuries.
The enemy is insidious and uses any kind of weapon they can, whether it be mechanical or chemical. Everything that is forbidden is being used by Russia. Chemical agents, shrapnel, anything really. There are things that we take out of soldiers' bodies that we can't explain to ourselves how these things flew into their bodies.
The Americans who'd been dragging their feet in providing the Ukrainians with the necessary firepower at the beginning of 2024 now look more willing to pump in more weapons into the Ukrainian battlefield.
And I am proud that the United States will soon announce more than $2.3 billion in new security assistance for Ukraine. This package, under presidential drawdown authority, will provide more air defense interceptors, anti-tank weapons, and other critical munitions from U.S. inventories.
But on the battlefield, Ukraine's problems are no longer about the paucity of weapons. What Ukraine is struggling with is its ability to field trained soldiers. An estimated 27,000 convicts are being released from prisons to fight on the front lines. But this is barely scratching the surface of the Ukrainian manpower problem.
The only problem we have is the shortage of manpower, ammunition and weapons. We have more than enough. Enough weapons, enough of all else, just the people. We do not have enough people.
This is some drone footage of what remains of the strategically crucial Ukrainian city of Chasiv Yar. Almost every building here has been reduced to a shell, and the Ukrainian forces have announced a strategic retreat from parts of the city. Viktor Orban's visit to Moscow was condemned as appeasement by Ursula von der Leyen, with a clear message that appeasement would not stop Putin. But in his meeting with Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin again insisted that Russia is ready to settle the Ukrainian conflict.
As for Russia, I have repeatedly said that we have always been and remain open to discussing a political and diplomatic settlement. However, on the other side of the conflict, we hear about the reluctance to resolve issues in this particular way. And the sponsors of Ukraine continue to try to use this country and its people as a battering ram, a victim in the confrontation with Russia.
From the outset of this war, backed with the American weapons, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had vowed that the only circumstance under which he would negotiate is when every Russian soldier had been evicted from the Ukrainian soil. In October 2022, Volodymyr Zelensky had in fact signed a decree ruling out any negotiations and going as far as to say that Ukraine will negotiate with Putin's successor in Kremlin. But much water has since flowed under the bridge, and for the first time since this conflict began, Volodymyr Zelensky appears to have made a U-turn, inviting Russian representatives to attend the next peace summit for the Ukrainian war. Besides his many other problems, Joe Biden does not want to appear to be on the losing side in yet another war, with the presidential elections just months away in the United States. But the question now is, how much longer will Kiev be able to fight this war, as with each passing week, any prospects of ousting the Russian soldiers from the Ukrainian soil appear to be getting bleaker and bleaker. The Turkish police detained nearly about 500 people after anti-Syrian riots rocked several cities. The spreading unrest was sparked late on the 30th of June in the central city of Kayseri, after social media reports emerged of a Syrian man sexually abusing a child. Properties and vehicles owned by the Syrians were vandalized and set ablaze in Kayseri, and soon afterwards, the violence even spread to several other provinces, including to Istanbul. The alleged incident is under investigation. Subsequently, hundreds of angry Syrians took to the streets in several towns in the rebel-held northwestern part of Syria, hurling stones on Turkish convoys and tearing down the Turkish flags. The Syrian border city of Afrin was the scene of the most violent clashes, with at least about 4 people being killed in an exchange of gunfire between armed protesters and the Turkish troops. So what actually is happening in this region between Turkey and Syria? Our next report gets more details.
Turkey was rocked on Sunday night after online reports emerged of an alleged sexual abuse of a 7-year-old girl in the central Anatolian city of Kayseri by a Syrian man identified only by his initials as IE. Infuriated Turkish residents flipped over cars and set Syrian-run shops ablaze, demanding that Syrians be kicked out of the country. The violence soon spread to other provinces of Hatay, Gaziantep, Konya, Bursa, and in Istanbul district. On Monday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, while condemning the anti-Syrian violence as unacceptable, blamed the political opposition, accusing it, without providing evidence, of stoking racism and tensions.
No one can reach anywhere by fueling xenophobia and hate towards refugees. One of the reasons for the saddening events caused by a small group in Kayseri is the opposition's poisonous discourse. No matter who it is, burning people's homes and their relatives, engaging in vandalism, setting fire to the streets is unacceptable.
The next day, Turkish Interior Minister announced arrest of 474 people involved in attacks targeting the Syrian community. Late on Monday, Turkey had also closed until further notice Bab al-Hawa along with Bab al-Salam and other small border crossings. The anti-Syrian violence in Turkey triggered backlash across the border in several towns in rebel-held northwest Syria, where Turkey maintains thousands of troops and has effectively carved out a sphere of influence, thereby preventing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from regaining control. In retaliatory riots, hundreds of Syrian demonstrators, some of them armed, took to the streets in solidarity with Syrians in Turkey.
This is a message to the Turks. As you treat our Syrian brothers there in Turkey and attack their women, we will make it equally difficult for you. As you condemn us, we condemn you. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We do not want our country to be ruled by Turks, nor by traitors and agents. In this country, people are free, and we will continue to demand freedom as long as we are alive. Our demands from Turkey are to respect Syrians and stop exploiting them. They use Syrians to collect donations from Europe, and when the European support stopped, they started deporting Syrians from Turkey. Now, Turkey is coordinating with the Assad regime and opening the Abu al-Zendin crossing. We do not want this crossing to be opened.
More than 3.5 million Syrians live in Turkey, the highest number in the region. Initially, they were welcomed as refugees when the civil war erupted in Syria in 2011. Most of them are living under temporary protection status, and many subsequently became Turkish citizens. But anti-refugee sentiment has been rising in Turkey, particularly against Syrians recently, because of the deep economic crisis that has seen soaring inflation. The dire state of the economy, rising nationalistic sentiment, and waning popularity of Erdogan and his party have all contributed to bouts of xenophobic violence targeting Syrians recently. It will be interesting to see how President Erdogan deals with this political minefield.
Pyongyang claims to have successfully tested a new tactical ballistic missile that is capable of carrying a 4.5-ton Super Large Warhead on the 1st of July. A day earlier, Seoul had reported the launch of 2 ballistic missiles by North Korea, adding that the second likely failed soon after its launch, blowing up in flight over land. Interestingly, the North Korean state news agency, the KCNA, made no mention of the second missile while lauding the launch of the first one. Additionally, in a rare disclosure of a future missile launch plan, the KCNA has said that North Korea's missile administration will conduct another launch of the same type of missile this month to test the explosion power of this new super large warhead. So how does North Korea's new super large warhead change the balance of power in the region? Our next report gets more details.
North Korea has been relentlessly modernizing its weapons arsenal to cope with what it calls US-led threats. On Tuesday, it claimed to have successfully tested a new tactical ballistic missile, Hwasong 411 DA 4.5, with a simulated heavy warhead. The test was conducted to verify its flight stability and hitting accuracy, at the maximum range of 500 kilometers and minimum range of 90 kilometers. Interestingly, it did not elaborate on the nature of the simulated warhead, where the missile launched from and where it landed. In response to the claim, the South Korean military said that it appears to be a case of deception.
Regarding North Korea's news report, we are leaning towards the possibility of deception. The second missile that flew abnormally appears to have landed in a field where there were no houses nearby. Also, it is extremely rare to carry out a test fire inland, but it is highly possible that it was a lie to say it was successful.
Noteworthy is the fact that North Korea did not publicize Monday's tests with photographs, unlike during previous such announcements. Also, testing the missile's maximum and minimum ranges suggested it performed 2 launches. Did North Korea deliberately not mention the second missile launch? Well, the South Korean military definitely thinks so, claiming the second missile appeared to have failed in the early stages of flight. If one were to go by Seoul's version, that missile's trajectory suggested a possible mid-air explosion over North Korea, which could have led to debris falling on the country. The Hwasong 411 is a series of short-range ballistic missiles developed by the North that are also known as KN-23 and KN-24. In all likelihood, the KN-23 is the missile that North Korea supplied to Russia to be used in the war against Ukraine. On 27th June, South Korea, Japan, and the United States had kicked off 3-day large-scale joint military drills called Freedom Edge, involving Navy destroyers, fighter jets, and the nuclear-powered U.S. aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt, aimed at boosting defenses against missiles, submarines, and air attacks. On the 30th of June, North Korea criticized the joint military exercise, dubbing the relationship among the 3 countries as the Asian version of NATO. What's worrying is that this show of strength from both sides is escalating the already heightened tensions in the Korean Peninsula. A misstep and all hell might break loose. Both sides should do well to exercise some caution.
At least 32 people have been killed and over 42 others were grievously wounded in a string of suicide attacks in the northeastern Nigerian town of Gwaza on the 29th of June. Saturday's attacks by suspected female suicide bombers targeted a wedding, a hospital, and also a funeral. It was one of the worst attacks in the region in many years, a reminder of the dark days of Nigeria's long-running struggle with the Islamist militants. Though no group has so far claimed responsibility for the attacks, the needle of suspicion points towards Boko Haram, who are active around the Gwaza region. So what was the motive behind the multiple suicide bombings? Our next report gets more details.
The northeastern Borno state in Nigeria is at the center of a 15-year Islamist insurgency. More than 40,000 people have been killed. And another 2 million people have been displaced by fighting, which started in 2009. Suicide attacks, including by women, have always been part of the militants' modus operandi, which reared its ugly head again on Saturday. The first attack, around 3 p.m., took place during a wedding ceremony, when a suicide bomber set off explosives among the guests.
The incident happened at about 3 p.m. at a wedding we were attending, when a lady came holding 2 children's hands, and then we heard the explosion.
As funeral prayers for the victims of the wedding attack were being conducted, another female suicide bomber detonated her device. The carnage continued a few minutes later as a teenage girl near the city's general hospital blew up another device.
I personally lost 3 of my friends instantly there at that first blast. Thereon, afterwards, some people now started for the funeral of one of the three that I lost. At the funeral ground, another one also blasted. Afterwards, as the DG SEMA said, because I spoke with him personally, he said they were preparing a rescue mission at the General Hospital Goza when another one blasted instantly in the hospital.
Reportedly, a fourth suicide attack targeted a security post, killing 3 people, including a soldier. Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima paid a visit to the Saturday attack's victims undergoing treatment at a specialist hospital in Maiduguri, capital of the Borno state.
So far, 32 people lost their lives. 42 were injured were brought from Goza. Out of them, 2 died. So far, 14 have been discharged and the remaining 26 are in the hospital. By God's grace, the government of Borno state will do its best to ensure it supports and takes care of them.
Boko Haram and its splinter group Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP, are the most active militant groups in the Borno state. They aim to establish a caliphate in the northeast of Africa's most populous nation. At the height of the conflict in 2014, Boko Haram insurgents had seized Gwoza after taking over parts of Borno state. In the same year, 276, mostly Christian, schoolgirls were abducted by Boko Haram from Chibok, a few kilometers from Gwoza. Nearly 100 of those girls still remain in captivity. A year later, the Nigerian army recaptured the town with the help of Chadian forces. Though the capabilities of the militant group has been dented, they still carry out deadly attacks against civilians and security forces. Saturday's audacious and coordinated attacks are yet another grim reminder of the security challenge being faced by President Bola Tinubu's government.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. If you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.